What's up everyone, it's Dakota and welcome back to another Modern video, and we are continuing our journey through Modern Horizons 3 as it continues to make a huge impact on the format. I don't think anyone's really shocked by that considering the track record of Modern Horizons period, but we seem to be getting a lot of cool archetypes into the format along with some returning faces to the format, and that's why we're going to take a look at Ruby Storm this week for Modern. A pretty insane take on the Storm deck. It was kind of, put on the shelf due to some other powerful decks that were running around the format. Of course, we had Scam, which is probably the natural predator for, decks like this and just Thoughtseize in general. But with kind of the return of some of these very powerful MH3 cards, or I guess rather the introduction of some Modern Horizons 3 cards, we see a little bit of the old Storm archetype kind of mixed in with these new powerful cards made for the Modern format, and seeming to be kind of crushing it. If you look on the side here, a ton of 5-0s deck lists, and then in the previous Modern Challenge dated for today, it actually has a few copies in the top 8 while also having another few in the top 32. So some pretty good results for the deck. But of course, before we get too deep into the deck list and we talk about everything that's going on and what makes Storm great again, if you're not already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me where I do a lot of the Modern and Pioneer format along with some other longer form videos pertaining to those formats, so if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing to the channel and ring the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted, as those are free, easy ways to support me and my channel. And of course, check out my podcast, the Casual Spikes podcast, I do with my co-host Randy over at Modern with Randy, where we talk about Modern, Pioneer, and kind of the happenings and things going on in the Magic world, try to go over the regional championships and whatnot as best as we can. So if any of that interests you, again, check it out. I have a playlist in the playlist section somewhere for the podcast, so we would greatly appreciate that. So Ruby Storm, it's kind of like an antithesis to Ruby Storm. There was a while ago, albeit there was kind of this mono red Ruby Storm deck in Legacy that revolved around the card and newly Modern legal Ruby Medallion. So there's a whole cycle of these where they're like blank medallion, where for a 2-mana artifact they make a corresponding color cost 1 less to cast. So Ruby Medallion is a 4 of in this deck. You can pay 2 mana and red spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. There's also another MH3 card that reduces the cost of relevant spells that we have. In Ral Monsoon Mage, a 2-mana 1/3 that makes instant sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Whenever you cast an instant sorcery spell during your turn, you flip a coin, and if you lose the flip, Ral deals 1 damage to you. If you win the flip, you may exile Ral. If you do, return him to the battlefield transformed under his owner's control. So, in a way, these are kind of two new cards to kind of like the Storm archetype. And the reason why these are a little bit better than something we would see like Goblin Electromancer, or we would even see Baral kind of in these lists, it allows you to be virtually mono red. There is kind of a white splash, so this is like a more of a Boros Storm deck. And I think this deck has more of a claim to being able to claim a second color than a lot of other decks that try to claim a third color, like Jund Scam being, Jund, because it plays like 3 to 4 copies of like Pick Your Poison. But I mean, we got some pretty good white cards on the sideboard, but I digress. So this allows you to essentially be mono red instead of having to be blue and red. So it makes your mana base just that much more consistent because you're only looking for one color of mana to actually be able to cast these spells while also still getting those relevant effects. If you flip Ral into a Leyline Prodigy, which might be triggering to some people because, Leyline, Modern, pretty traumatic, honestly, for some players. But it enters the battlefield with an additional loyalty counter for each instant sorcery spell you've cast this turn. So going back to like the front side of Ral Monsoon Mage, if you win the flip, you do not have to exile Ral. You have the option to do so. So you can kind of like cast a bunch of spells and, kind of keep the chain going. And it's actually pretty beneficial for you for the other spells and stuff that we have. So you play, you flip it, you cast a bunch of spells, you can +1 to continue to have that effect to give your instant sorcery spells a 1 less to cast. You can -2 and deal 2 damage divided you choose among 1 or 2 targets, excuse me. Draw a card if you control a blue permanent other than Ral, which we don't really have in this deck. And then -8, you exile the top 8 cards of your library. You may cast instant and sorcery spells from among them this turn without paying their mana cost, which is kind of the thing that you're building up to play. It has 2 loyalty on the other side, so if you cast 6 other spells, you're going to be able to flip Ral and be able to ultimate him and get potentially multiple different impulse effects, maybe some ritual effects, or find so many other ways to actually win the game. So what exactly is this deck doing? So we know that we have our cost reducers that are a lot harder to seemingly interact with some ways to be a little bit more consistent. So starting with the spells, we have Strike It Rich, which is super simple. For red mana, you create a treasure token, you can flash it back for 3. This actually enables some turn 2 kills with, Ral, Monsoon, or Ruby Medallion, because you can play Strike It Rich on 1, you end up making a treasure token, you play your second land, you're going to be able to play Ral or play Ruby Medallion, and then you're going to be able to cast a plethora of 2 mana ritual spells that will end up actually netting you mana. So we start with a Desperate Ritual and a Pyretic Ritual. Essentially do the same thing for the most part. They both, for 2 mana, give you 3 red mana, with Desperate Ritual having the chance for you to be able to splice onto Arcane. So if you cast a Desperate Ritual, you're able to splice another Desperate Ritual on it. And actually, with a cost-reducing effect, you're going to end up generating tons of mana with this. So not really good as like a starter ritual if you have multiples in hand, because you're going to want to splice them together to be able to generate even more mana to essentially make sure that your bottleneck is only cards and not actually mana. So pretty neat. Manamorphose being infinitely awesome when it only costs 1 mana, because then it essentially generates you an extra mana and you get to draw a card. So it's essentially it's plays the ritual part pretty well and gives you an extra card on top of it. Going down deeper, where we have these impulse effects and Reckless Impulse and Ren's Resolve, essentially doing the same thing. You exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until the end of your next turn, you may play those cards. So if you're kind of playing more towards a fair strategy, maybe you have a really strong hand, but no cost reducing cards, you can just play a Ren's Resolve, and this is going to help you dig a little bit deeper. So even if you tap out to play this on turn 2, you're going to have access to those cards on the next turn as well, to be able to play lands, maybe play the spell off of it, what have you. Or, if you hit 2 rituals, be able to cast both rituals off of it, net a ton of mana, and then kind of go off with what your hand has to offer. Glimpse the Impossible, another new card from Modern Horizons 3. For 3 mana, you exile the top 3 cards of your library. You may play those cards this turn. So a little bit different from Ren's Resolve and Reckless Impulse, where you can only cast the cards that turn. But then at the beginning of your next end step, if any of those cards remain exiled, put them into your graveyard, then create a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn creature token for each card put in your graveyard this way. So in the absolute worst case, you play this for 3 mana, you don't cast any of the spells, you can't play any of them, what have you. They end up going into your graveyard, which is going to help out with a card that we're going to look at later. It potentially helps out with a card that we're going to look at later. And you create 3 Eldrazi spawns that are all going to be able to be sacrificed for a colorless mana. So this is going to kind of help you ramp a little bit. If you don't have a Ral Monsoon Mage or a Ruby Medallion, find one off of this, whatnot. You're going to put those cards into your graveyard. You're going to make 3 Eldrazi spawn. You're going to have 6, potentially 7 mana going into your next turn. And usually with Storm decks, once you reach a critical mass of mana that you can actually play with enough rituals and whatnot, you're able to kind of go off even without having some of those cost reducers and stuff, because some of these rituals do still generate you mana, even if it's only 1 mana instead of 2 or 3 mana potentially. So pretty sweet card. Going further, you have Valakut's Awakening. It's a land on one side, and then on the front half you may put any number of cards from your hand on the bottom of your library and draw that many +1. So it's always going to at least draw you 1 card, but if you have just a few lands in hand, you're able to put 2 or 3 lands from your hand onto the bottom and then draw 3 or 4 cards, which is quite a bit. And especially when you're able to reduce the cost of this again by 1 or 2, if you have a Ruby Medallion and a Ral Monsoon, for 1 mana you get to do this, and you get to again keep looking for some of your rituals. You get to add your storm count to Ral, add to your storm count in general, and just kind of keep the pressure going. Before we actually get to that card, we're going to look at Past in Flames. So this is kind of where some of the synergies with Glimpse the Impossible come into play, where Past in Flames has been kind of the de facto finisher, or the way that we get to the finish with these Storm decks, where for 4 mana, each instant sorcery card in your graveyard gains flashback until end of turn. The flashback cost is equal to its mana cost, and you can flash it back for 5 mana. So Past in Flames is going to essentially give all your rituals and things like that, flashback, and a typical line of like Stormplay is usually when you have a cost reducer, you end up going ritual, 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 Past in Flames, flashback, ritual, so on, and then you just end up netting a ton of mana, and then you can find ways to then play other spells from your hand to kind of get them into the graveyard, and then you can just flashback Past in Flames, give them flashback, and then you end up, having your win condition of winning the game. Which brings us to Wish. So this is being the last card, and so far, we don't really have a win condition. Ral is very powerful, but, we're not going to -2 him to ping our opponent to death until end of time. So Wish allows us to play a card that we own from outside the game this turn. And, while for most of the exile effects, we get something if we don't play it, that turn, or we get to until our next turn to play them. Wish allows us to play it that turn, but we're going to win the game that way. So the classic win for Storm: Grape Shot, deals 1 damage to any target. Storm, you copy this spell. For each spell cast before it this turn, and you may choose new targets for the copy. If your opponent for some reason can prevent 1 damage from a different source, has hexproof, whatever, you also have the card Empty the Warrens, which creates 2 1/1 goblin creature tokens, and it also has Storm, so for each spell you cast before it, you're going to be able to generate 2 1/1 goblin creature tokens. And this is a way that you can basically also win the game. It's a little bit more fair because you end up having to wait until the next turn to actually be able to do it, but that's fine, because most of the time, if you're taking Empty the Warrens, it's because they can't get rid of a ton of, you're going to make more goblins than they have blockers, or you're going to be able to kill them on the swing anyway, almost regardless of what they do, and they're not going to play something like a Supreme Verdict or whatever, where, you can just play Grape Shot and then just absolutely outright win the game if your opponent is not able to actually interact with the card Grape Shot. Some other interesting cards on the sideboard. Another Past in Flames. So if you don't find a Past in Flames, you can just wish for a Past in Flames and play it. There's this card Galvanic Relay, which we had seen in the green-red Storm decks a while back that were playing the Goblin Anarchomancer, that you can then exile the top card of your library, and then during your next turn you may play that card. So you don't get access to that card right away, but Galvanic Relay does give you access to a card, and then for each spell that you cast before it, also gives you access to another card, where we would see people get up to Storm 6, 7, 8, or 9, and you would essentially get to draw a full new hand, but it was Thoughtseize proof, and you're going to be able to untap and play those cards as long as you lived past that turn, which more than likely you're going to be able to if you were kind of if you were wishing for a Galvanic Relay. You also have Alchemist Gambit, which is going to give you an extra turn, and then during that turn, damage can't be prevented, and at the beginning of your end step, you lose the game. But if you cast it for its cleave cost, then you get rid of that, at the beginning of your end step, you lose the game, and you exile it. So this is kind of a way that you can get past, damage, combat damage preventing spells. So this is a way that you can attack with a ton of goblin tokens, that you can Grape Shot your opponent, and they really don't have a way that they can, if they gave protection from all their things, then, or from all your things, then this is going to allow you to, win the game through those type of effects. Continuing the sideboard, you have Orum's Chant, where players can't cast spells this turn, and then if the spell wasn't kicked, creatures can't attack this turn as well. So this is a way that you can essentially force through your combo. You have Static Prison that is going to exile a target non-land permanent until Static Prison leaves the battlefield, and you get 2 energy. At the beginning of your pre-combat May phase, you sacrifice it unless you pay an energy. So this is going to give you a way to keep things exiled, non-land things exiled off the battlefield for a pretty cheap mana cost here. And then we have a Flage Titan of Fire's Fury, which has actually been a lot better than I think people gave it credit for when it was spoiled. So it's basically in the third Titan, the cycle of, or the mini cycle, I guess now, of Titans that we saw on Theros Beyond Death, where it gets sacrificed unless it escape. It lightning helixes your opponent when it enters the battlefield, and you can pay double red, double white, and 5 other cards from your graveyard to escape it, and then be able to do the same thing when it enters the battlefield or attacks. So pretty neat stuff there. And that is the Ruby Storm deck for Modern. pretty long. I mean, a lot longer than I expected it to be, but that's just kind of the nature of like these Storm decks. We had seen for a long time that people try to maybe play Storm, and it really just wasn't that good in like the traditional form where we're used to seeing, you know, like blue-red, where we are used to seeing like Goblin Electromancer, and we're used to seeing Brawl being like the ways that we reduce our spells. And, you know, thanks to Ral actually being able to not only reduce the cost of spells, but then also kind of be an engine to keep things going, where, you know, with Brawl, you kind of had a way to do it, but you were forced to play the card like Remand, and it only really looted, where this is going to, you know, the damage is kind of like irrelevant, because whether you lose or win the flip, you know, if you cast like 8 or 9 spells, I mean, you're very likely to win at least one of those flips, hopefully a lot later, later in the turn, so you're able to flip it, ultimate it, and get access to 8 more cards, to where you're very likely to find a Valakut's Awakening, to then find like Wish or find Past in Flames, to then go get those things, Reckless Impulse, Ren's Resolve, Glimpse of the Impossible, etc. Overall, this deck looks really sweet. It plays very well in the format, considering that you kind of want these cards that are a little bit harder to interact with. So Ruby Medallion just being a lot harder card to interact with as far as like a mana reducing effect, and Ral just kind of giving you a big payoff for casting all of those spells as well. Just make it kind of like a formidable duo in the format, and this deck could be here to stay. I mean, it has the potential to win on turn 2, has a lot more consistent kills on turn 3, you know, and possibly just goes underneath of the Nadu combo deck that we looked at last week. So yeah, that's going to do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what Modern Horizons 3 modern deck you would like us to go over next week, and I'll be sure to get it queued up and ready to go. People haven't really taken me up on that offer. I don't know if they make it here or not. So if you did, you know, also let me know if you made it to the end of the video as well. I would greatly appreciate it. Of course, subscribe to the channel, ring notification bell, show some support for the channel as we try to go for 1K subscribers at the end of the year. And yeah, that's going to do it for me. Hope you all enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all in the next one.